Allah. हो की ज़बान व दहन से बयान वस्फ़ दुरूद, दुरूद पढ़ने से कायम नमाज के है हुदूद, दुरूद पढ़ने से बख्शे गुनाह रब्बे वदूद, दुरूद पढ़ने से खुल दे बरी में होगा वरूद, मुहिब चार दमासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। अल्लाह दुरूद पढ़ के पुकारा कलम दमेर काम, अमीन रोक लो अब तासने जुबा की लगाम, रसूल और फातिमा ज़हरा है और 12 इमाम, यही बुजुर्ग है सब लायके दुरूद और सलाम, मुहिब 4 दमासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद।
رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم سيدي، فيا ليتنا يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي، فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا مولانا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد لا محمد ولا محمد، وعلى بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين اصطفاهم الله أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق وهو أصدق الصادقين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، يهدي من يشاء ويضل من يشاء. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. My respected brothers and sisters of Ijal, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. With the rise of extremist groups like ISIS, the discussion surrounding Muslims and Islam has been a discussion of very high intensity. Many have been talking about Islam. Research is now being done onto the reality of how Muslims see their text, And a strong discussion has been happening around the philosophical and the jurisprudential parts of Islam. Many are looking at verses like the hand-cutting verses, and whether Muslims take these verses literally or metaphorically. Many Muslims have approached their religion by saying, how do we justify certain verses in the Quran? What's the essence behind the wife-beating verse? What's the essence behind other verses? And a discussion has come about with regards to the nature and the way that Muslims approach their text and approach their religion. Because mind you, individuals like Sam Harris and Bill Maher and many neoliberals who were on the left try to take religion and give it a very, very simple outlook. Religion is very easy to many people. It is you opening the text, looking at what the actual words say, and then saying, this is what Muslims must believe. It's the equivalent of a Muslim opening up a Bible and saying, by opening up the book of Deuteronomy, whether it's a book from the Old Testament or the New Testament, I can actually understand Christianity as a whole by simply opening up a book and reading its text. And if the adherents of Christianity believe that this book is literally a book of God, then they would obviously believe in these texts that I see. So for example, if a verse in the Bible says that if a person is of a specific religious belief, you may kill them. If I believe as a Christian, if I were a Christian, that the Bible is the word of God, then I must actually believe this idea. And it's a very basic, fundamental way of how many people approach religion. Mind you, what they forget to tell many people is that religion is not a monolithic worldview. What I mean by monolithic is, it's not simply one interpretation. Rather, religion is much more complex than that. Islam in itself is marked by so many different interpretations, religious worldviews, and philosophical worldviews. And the reason why proclaiming that ISIS is a representation somehow of Islam, my case and argumentation for tonight is that it's actually missing the diversity of interpretation that Islam has. And tonight, I'd like to examine something in a specific way and order, because it's an extremely important discussion. The first thing I want to look at is what were the three main philosophical schools within the religion of Islam. And I'm talking specifically Imam al-Baqir time and forward. And how did they approach religion? And how are those worldviews still existent today? Secondly, what was the worldview of Imam al-Sadiq and how did he approach religion? And when he approached religion, what did he think of philosophy? And what did he think of logic? And did he reject these ideas or did he incorporate them? And if he incorporated them, in which way did he bring them into religion? Third of all, which Islamic sect is mostly marked by the beliefs of a group like ISIS? And how were they a nuisance to the early Muslims? And how did they take part in the killing of Imam Ali alayhi salam after the Battle of Siffin? Fourth of all, what does Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam says? And what does he talk about in Du'a Makarim al-Akhlaq? To try to bring together differing worldviews to create some sort of sense and harmony. I want to look at these main topics tonight for one main reason. It's because there seems to be a misunderstanding of what religion or the nature of religion is. Many people will simply look at a group like ISIS and say, they must be a representation of Muslims. These must represent what Islam is. And there are many self-reflecting Muslims who approach me even and say, what do we think of these ideas that seem to be within our text? Do we believe in these things? Or do we reject them? And to what extent can I call a group like ISIS Islamic? Hopefully by the end of tonight's discussion, we can try to understand some of these questions and hopefully answer them, because this topic is of extreme importance for two main reasons. The first is it has a theological importance on the role that American Muslims will play in the future. Me and you are not just Muslims who have immigrated here from Pakistan or from India or from Iraq or from Lebanon. We have a role to play in this country as we grow older. Many sitting here are doctors, consultants, future politicians, lawyers, who one day are going to play a part in the political world of the United States. And it's extremely important to know as a Muslim, what are the ideologies of my religion? And how can I answer those who puts me behind a pedestal? Because one day many will come to you and say, ISIS is a group of terrorists supported by this specific verse. What do you think of this as a Muslim? And your position is to give a satisfying answer. On the second level, we have a role to play in this country, in the sense that we need to get involved politically, to understand and to give ourselves a voice. If we don't know the position that Muslims hold toward other terrorist groups and groups such as ISIS, we need to have a sense of justification or religious justification as to how we see these groups. And hopefully tonight's presentation will help in that regard. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Starting in the time of Imam al-Baqir and up to Imam al-Sadiq and much more than that, you started to see a real turmoil and change in the Muslim world, because there were certain ideas that were non-existent before that started to really take form. Starting from the school of Egypt and Alexandria, many would come to the Arabian Peninsula with the worldviews of Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. You see that all of a sudden, Muslims started being exposed to Greek ideas, Judeo-Christian ideas, because individuals like St. Augustine, St. Aquinas, many people had been influenced by these worldviews of the early philosophers. And what they had done is they had taken a theory of Plato or a theory of Socrates and pretty much turned it into something Christian. So the idea of a God within Christianity has many striking similarities to the ideas of Plato and Socrates. And these ideas started coming to the Muslim world, and you saw a shift within the Muslim believers and also those within the Arabian Peninsula who were non-believers. Debates started happening, and specifically philosophical debates that really polarize a community. The first most important debate that started happening within the Muslim world, which started in the time of al-Baqir and then continued in the time of al-Sadiq, was the debate and the discussion surrounding free will. And what you started to see was many leaders who were in the time of our Imams al-Sadiq and al-Baqir, who would give themselves authority by saying that free will did not actually exist. And if free will doesn't exist, then as a leader oppressing his people, you can really get away with a lot of things because God has not really decreed anything. If God hasn't decreed anything and there is no free will and it's simply determined, then all of a sudden you can get away with what you do, because all you have to say is what? God made me this way. I was decreed this way. And therefore the fact that you're going against me is you going against God, because everything here has been determined. Many Muslims were very fed up with this idea because of the oppression that they saw, and specifically the beheadings and the killings that these rulers would do. So therefore you started to see the emergence of a group by the name of the Mu'tazilites. Please be very keen to the history and the names, because these are the core sects that later shaped groups that were very influenced by very, very literal and extremist worldviews. So the Mu'tazilites come up marked by people like Hassan al-Basri and Wasil bin Ata. And their main philosophy said what? Said that before we can understand religion at all, before we can even approach religion, and before we can even start to know what religion is, we need to take a rational, philosophical approach before any type of belief that we form. So their starting position was what? Was rationality and philosophical discourse. I can't simply say I believe in something and then later prove it. No, I don't believe in anything unless it's rationally proven and philosophically proven. They advocated that if the whole world or the existence was predetermined, then how does it make sense for God to throw me in hell if He predetermined my sins? An idea which didn't make sense. If God's going to create some sort of just system where He's going to throw me in hell, surely I should have some sort of say within what I'm doing. But if the world is just determined, and it's all determinism and there's no sense of free will, then I'm just a puppet playing this game. And so in order for them to put the caliphs into authority, someone like Muawiyah, in order for Muawiyah to have some sort of response to the people, the Mu'tazilites came to agreement that there has to be complete free will. We are free in what we do. Otherwise, we can't hold anyone accountable. And that was one of the main debates. Now, mind you, the free will predestination debate kicked off the Islamic tradition. Before that debate, philosophical discourses weren't happening. Now, the Mu'tazilites saw one main response and one main group that gave them a difficulty. That group was the traditionalist group that was marked by Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Because the argument was, if you're going to believe that rationality is going to solve all of your problems, and you need to believe in something rationally before you can actually believe in it, then you have one main problem that you need to solve. And that is, how do you rationally justify things that have no rationality? Angels. Why would an all-able, almighty God need to create a being that does his or her bidding for them? Why would this almighty God create a being that would do their work when they could do it just as easily? I mean, for goodness sakes, we're talking about Allah Azza wa Jal here. His idea is kun fayakun. If He says let it be, it should be. Why would God need that? The second argument that was brought towards the Mu'tazilites was that if you're going to say that everything should be rationalized and can be rationalized, then tell me, how do you prove that a talking baby like Jesus is rational? How are you going to rationalize that? In which way? And therefore, the early rationalists saw a sense of opposition, where they realized that if you're going to try to rationalize everything in religion, every single thing, you're going to face a serious problem. And that problem is rationalizing things that might have no rationality. They are simply matters of faith. And this is extremely important, because within our world today, and with my experience with young people, I'm constantly marked and tasked by questions that people bring to me. Brother Ali, what's the rationality behind this? Why did the Prophet go on a flying horse towards Isra and Mi'raj, for example? Prove that to me. Prove to me that God can split the sea. What proof or evidence do we have? Prove to me that Jesus was never crucified. Correct? Prove to me that if you throw your staff on the floor, it turns into a snake. Prove these things to me. If religion is as irrational as you say it is, which is the Mu'tazilite position, then surely these things should be proven. You should be able to give some sort of rational proof. Typically, what you end up with is something known as apologists within religion. These are people who might come on the minbar or talk to many people and say everything in religion is completely rational, leaving the listener or the audience looking for rational explanations for everything. The early Mu'tazilite position was challenged on this regard, and we're going to come to what Imam al-Sadiq's position is on this particular issue. The early Mu'tazilite had a serious issue, which is, how do you rationalize things that don't seem to have a rational basis? It doesn't mean they're wrong, but you need to believe in them through a faith-based system. So where does the rationality come from? Ahmad ibn Hanbal begged to differ. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, today we have the Hanbali school of thought, begged to differ. Their approach was that instead of taking rationality before the literal text of the Quran and Hadith, what we do is all of a sudden we say, you know what, throw rationality to the side. We will read the Quran and the Hadith very literally and apply those understandings to the way that we see religion. So someone like Ahmad ibn Hanbal would read a verse which says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yadullahi fawqa aydihim. God's hand is on top of their hand. Ahmad ibn Hanbal would come to a conclusion that God must have a hand. God must have a shin. God must have a face. God must have a throne. And there are many ahadith within the Salafi school of thought or the Hanbali school of thought where God has an actual throne. He sits on His throne. His throne is actually made of wool. He has hands. On the day of judgment, He'll take His feet and put them in the hellfire to put it out. These are all ahadith giving God specific physical traits. Now, Ahmad ibn Hanbal reached another conclusion. This conclusion was interesting. He looked at the Mu'tazilite and said, you know what? You think God needs to be just, because the main argument against for free will was what? If we don't have free will, then God isn't just. He's not just. Because how can you throw me in hell for something that you determined that I had no free will in? Ahmad ibn Hanbal came back and said, what? You Mu'tazilites are crazy. You're saying God has to be just? If God is binded by justice, all of a sudden he's not God anymore. Something is controlling him, which is justice. And he used a specific verse to justify this idea. The main verse that he used was what? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The verse that I started off with, Yahdi man yasha wa yudhillu man yasha. Ibn Hanbal had a belief that God doesn't even have to be just, based on the verse that says God guides whom he wants and God misguides whom he wants. God's justice is arbitrary. It doesn't have to be just. Now, this was a very literal interpretation of religion. And the Hanbali traditional position was what? We look at things in a specific order. Forget rationality. We look at the text, we read it literally, and we progress from there. Now, mind you, this school of thought later paved the way for individuals like Ibn Taymiyyah and the Salafi school of thought, which said, you know what? We need to go back to the way that the originals saw religion. So when someone like Ibn Taymiyyah comes and says that the Shia are Zanadiqa or Kafara or going to hell, this is really based on the idea that Shia believe in some sort of free will. That Shia have accepted ideas that have some sort of rationality or philosophy, and therefore when it comes to match it with a literal interpretation, that doesn't exist. Because we don't really look at things extremely literally. Now, of course, we're varied within the Shia school of thought itself, but we don't look at it extremely literally. Later, you would see many schools that would follow in the footsteps of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And if you read much Sunni text, you'll open it and you read Shaykhul Islam, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Because Ahmad ibn Hanbal is seen as a very strong literary figure, a philosophical figure, a man who polarized the literal school within the Sunni school of thought. The third position was very interesting. A man by the name of Ash'ari emerged who said, one night I had a dream about Rasulullah. Rasulullah said to me, O Ash'ari, there are those who are coming up with their own conclusions about religion. Be steadfast in holding on to the hadith and the Quran. He woke up that one night and he started preaching the fact that we need to get rid of this philosophical discussion on religion and rational discussion. We need to get rid of that, and we need to focus on the actual text, because many people were coming to conclusions that were not Islamic. With the influence of the philosophical world, people were starting to look at the text in a very different way, reinterpreting religion, reinterpreting verses, looking at verses a bit more metaphorically. That was a very big no-no for many people. The same night, after giving these sermons, Ash'ari has another dream. Ash'ari's dream, Rasulullah comes to him and says to him, Ash'ari, I told you to bring people back to the hadith and to bring them back to the Quran. Did I ever tell you to get rid of philosophy or rationality? Ash'ari wakes up again. The next day, he starts perhaps one of the most strongest movements within Islam, which is the Ash'ari school of thought. The Ash'ari school of thought said that yes, we need to stick to the Quran and to the Hadith, but show us a place where Rasulullah said rationality and logic were not allowed. The idea was, who are you to ban philosophical discourse or rational discourse? If Rasulullah never forbade those things, we don't have actual hadith forbidding these things, how could you make it haram? And therefore Ash'ari tried to mix a sense of literalism as well as some sort of philosophy. And the person who was really marks this school of thought, and this person is extremely influential. Ask any Muslim today, specifically from the Sunni school of thought, you must have heard of Al-Ghazali. And if you haven't heard of Al-Ghazali, you need to go search Al-Ghazali, because he's extremely influential. Al-Ghazali's position was that we need to go back to Islam, to the literal text of the Quran, to the Hadith. However, we need to reach those conclusions through rationality and through philosophical discourse. Now, there was another person who came to the same conclusion. But this person was 400 years before Al-Ghazali. Who was that person? Jaffar al-Sadiq. At one point, a man comes into his house and sits next to him. This is 400 years before Al-Ghazali. And Ghazali is seen as this phenomenal thinker. If you ever read his Tahaffuz al-Falasifa, which is, it's called the colliding of philosophers, because he really saw philosophers as people who were just colliding amongst each other. They had no serious purpose. A man comes to the house of Imam al-Sadiq. He says to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, we seem to see so much philosophical discussion, and many falasifa are discussing and talking about religion and rationality and giving arguments. Mind you, one of the most famous of those people who was engaging in those things is Al-Mufaddal. If you ever read Tawheed Al-Mufaddal, it's the notes of Al-Mufaddal, who's the companion of Imam al-Sadiq, who wrote those notes, and we later have them published from the works of Imam al-Sadiq and Mufaddal. So a simple example is this. Mufaddal says, I was standing next to Jaffar al-Sadiq one day, and he looks at me and says to me, Mufaddal, I want you to look at that bird that's flying. He says, I looked at the bird. He says to him, do you see how the bird's wings allow them to go up and down in altitude? He says, yes. He says, look again at the bird. He says, did you know that the bones of the bird are hollow? That allows the bird to fly without being too heavy. He says, look again. He says, do you see how the bird lays its eggs instead of carrying its young ones? He says, yes. He says, that also allows for the bird to fly without being too heavy. He says, look again. He says, do you see how the legs of the bird can fit right under its wings? He says, yeah. He says, the reason it has those is so that there's not too much air resistance when it flies. He says, look again. Do you see the way that the beak of the bird is shaped? He says, yes. He says, that allows it to carry food for its young ones to bring back to its nest. Then he looks at Mufaddal. He says to him, with all of this complexity and order that only a simple bird has. Now, we're not talking about anything really complex, the multiverse theory or anything scientific or nothing too philosophical. It's simply examining a bird. He says, do you think that such complexity and such order can come from a random event or no order? Must there not be some sort of designer or creator? This marked the famous position of Jaffar al-Sadiq. When someone came to him and sat with him in his house, he said to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, what is your position on philosophy? And what is your position on rationale? Imam gives him a two-part answer. The first part, he says to him that rationality and philosophy really within religion will get you nowhere. Now, what does he mean by that? The second part explains. He says, but what they can do is help you reach certain conclusions about the reality of existence which religion has provided for you. This is very important. The first set of discussions is what? Is that if I'm going to take philosophy only or rationality only, then it's going to be marked by 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 different opinions that exist out there, each opinion making a lot of sense. And some may be making no sense. He says, however, you can use philosophy and rationality to prove the realities of existence that religion has given you. So if I want to prove the existence of God, I can use a philosophical argument to prove God. If I want to prove something in religion, I can use a philosophical position to prove something in religion. That was the position of Imam al-Sadiq. Now mind you, Ghazali comes way later and takes a very position and says what? That we can use philosophy, but it should not trump or it should not come to conclusions that are opposite to religion. Now here's kind of the problem that we have today. The issue that we have is we expect everything to be rationalized. We think that when I approach religion, because I live in a country or in a world that puts such a strong emphasis on rationality and philosophy, surely all of my conclusions must be rational and philosophical. And the main point to keep in mind here is that the early Islamic worldview was not marked by this discussion. Many people saw philosophy only as a means to get to their religious conclusions. And that's why Imam Ali alayhi salam was perhaps one of the main victims of a worldview that took religion extremely literally. Because when we look at ISIS, we ask ourselves, were there ever groups in Islamic history that did the same thing that ISIS did? And the answer is yes. If you ever study the history of al-Khawarij, you'll see that what separated the Khawarij ideologically from any other group is how strictly and literally they took the Quranic discussion. So if you were seen by the Khawarij committing zina, or hitting someone, or lying to someone, or doing anything that's bad, they took it upon themselves to punish you. And the Khawarij had many people burned to the stake. They had many people executed in cold blood. And even Ibn Muljam, who killed Imam Ali alayhi salam, was a Khariji. Even though he was motivated by political works from the other side, by the likes of Muawiyah and others, his ideology was extremely, extremely Khawarij ideology. Now, why were the Khawarij angry at Imam Ali? In the Battle of Siffin, when there seemed to be a losing side to Muawiyah and Imam Ali alayhi salam was winning, Muawiyah said, look, we have a very easy tactic. All we need to do is take these Qur'ans, put them on a spear, raise them, and by respecting the sanctity of the Qur'an, Ali ibn Abi Talib and his men won't attack. Don't worry. So there were some within the army of Ali who said, don't attack. This is the Qur'an. How could you? Imam Ali replied to them and said that the Qur'an is a book of sanctity, but use your prudence and realize that obviously this is a trick that Muawiyah is trying to pin on us. He wants us to fall for this trick. And therefore Imam Ali decided to attack and the battle commenced. Later on, the Khawarij saw Ali ibn Abi Talib as a complete heretic, the man who attacked the Qur'an. And they took it upon themselves to hunt him down, to try to kill him, as they did with many other Muslims. So that's why when you see the extremism of ISIS, and some of us are really surprised because we haven't seen something like this come up recently. But when we see this extremism has been marked within Islamic history. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, burnt at the stake. Many of them were killed and beheaded for their beliefs. Now this was marked in the time of the Khawarij and even later within Islam. Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi was killing 2,000 Shi'as every single night. Many from the Sada families of the Ahlul Bayt. This type of terrorism wasn't very new. It was marked by a very literal Islamic interpretation. And that's why many people come to me and say, how Islamic is ISIS? My reply is this. Are there schools of thought today within Islam who think that the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah and the likes of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and the likes of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, are there schools in Islam today who believe that these are part of the Islamic tradition? Yes. There are schools within the world today who think that the works of individuals like Ibn Taymiyyah, these are works of profound importance. These are pillars in religion. And so my question is this. At what point can we say this is part of the Islamic tradition and this is not part of the Islamic tradition? Unfortunately, the case just so happens to be that the Islamic tradition is marked by so many different interpretations. And therefore, when Ibn Taymiyyah comes and gives a specific interpretation, which is a literalist, extremist interpretation, we can't just say this isn't Islamic. This needs to be addressed. Yes, it is Islamic, but it's a specific sect in Islam. That is a hair in Islam that we need to discuss and tackle. Because that hair seems to be very loud. It's a very loud group that's within Islam. And so it's important to realize when we look at groups like ISIS, and we try to examine their philosophical roots, their roots come from an extremely literal interpretive form. A form that really puts away any form of rationality or any form of discussion. Now mind you, the question is, how does this relate to the Shia school of thought today? Because many times, even within our own school of thought, we're marked by so many different ideologies and so many differences. Within the school of thought, the Shia school of thought, for example, we have those who disagree with any philosophical discourse. There are those who agree. And so we find a sense of a split. Now this split in the early Muslims caused a lot of chaos. There were those like Ibn Taymiyyah who called for takfir of the Shia and takfir of anybody who was doing falasifa. Others like Ahmad ibn Hanbal called anyone who disagreed with him a heretic. And there are those within Islam today who if Marja' Fulan says something and Marja' Fulan says something and those two Maraja' say something different, then you immediately hear the screaming and the shouting and the takfir. Right? My Marja' believes this. Your Marja' believes that. Kafir. Right away. Or if you have, for example, within a community, a split between a person who might see things in a more liberal way versus someone who sees it in a more conservative way, or somebody who takes rationality and somebody who doesn't, takes more of faith approach to believe, you immediately see it's as if a conflict should immediately arise. And that should never be the case. The problem with the early Muslim community was they were marked by hostility. The point that we're trying to reach is if I do disagree with you on ideology, that doesn't need to turn into takfir. Because Marja' A disagrees with Marja' B, that doesn't mean that there should be a sense of takfir. It's of the utmost beauty to see someone like Ayatollah Khamenei, who in the 70s creates something like Wilayat al-Faqih. And Shaheed al-Sadr brings about a different theory, which is almost the opposite, called Wilayat al-Ummah. One is marked by the leadership of an imam or a sheikh or a faqih. The other one is marked by the general public leading the community, while the scholars aiding the growth of the community. Two completely different political worldviews, but the men were still able to respect each other and tolerate each other. The problem at times is when the followers come together and think that because the Maraja' disagree, then that means we immediately should fight with each other. You're immediately my enemy. The Fadlallah is the enemy of the Shirazi. The Shirazi is the enemy of the Fadlallah. Mind you, the debate takes another turn. I believe in religion this way. You believe in religion this way. You're a kafir, or you're this, or you're that, and the hostility continues. The point that we might want to reach is learn from the past of extremism and those who have put signs of takfir or anyone who is different. Mind you, this happens from both sides, the liberal and the conservative side. The liberal side looks at the conservative side and says, these people, I can't believe they do this. And the conservative side looks at the liberal side and says, I can't believe they do this. And it's just a complete argument. Now, Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam gives a profound example, and tonight we commemorate the Shahada. Gives a great example in his Dua Makaram al-Akhlaq on the way that you discuss with others and the etiquette of discussion when it comes to differences of opinions. Because mind you, discourse on religion is a very heated discourse. People come to different understandings of life and to different conclusions. And Imam alayhi salam, within his Dua Makaram al-Akhlaq, he says, Oh Allah, allow me to be in a position where if I argue with someone and I know that I might be wrong, to have the humility, to have a level of humility where I can admit to myself that I need to go back and grow. Imam continues to say, he says, if I win something or if I am good at something, bring me down a level of humility in myself so that I become more humble in what I may have. And Imam alayhi salam is giving this lesson in discussion and tolerance. And I say perhaps the most mark of tolerance is Imam alayhi salam when he's walking in the streets of Medina at one point, and he's carrying a sack behind his shoulder. And he's walking around in the city and giving people different food and those who are in need. In the middle of the night, a man approaches him by the name of Hussein. And this is the same man who had cut the pinky of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And Imam Zain al-Abidin sees him, he recognizes him, but he does not recognize the Imam. And he's talking to Imam alayhi salam. The Imam looks at him, he gives him the food because he was a beggar, he was hungry. Imam then removes his litham, whatever covering was on his face, and he says to him that you are Ali ibn al-Hussein. He says, I remember when your father Hussein was on the ground. He says, and the men had come and surrounded him from every angle after Shimr had severed his head. He said, one man took his shirt, another man took his trousers, another man took his imamah. He says, I saw that everything was gone from the body of this man. There was nothing of value left for me to take. He says, the only thing I saw was a ring on the pinky of your father Hussein. He says, so I decided to take out my dagger and take off the pinky of Hussein because the ring would not come off. He says, and I recently sold that ring. He says, but why do you help me? Why do you give me food now that I cut off the pinky of your father, Hussein? Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam starts to cry, and he says, we are nahnu ahlu bayt nubuwa. We are the house of mercy. We are the house of kindness. And the life of Imam alayhi salam was marked by this very discourse. Every time he would eat food, his tears would mix with the food. He would walk into the market and he'd see men killing sheep or slaughtering a cow, and he would start to cry. And he'd say to them, before you killed the sheep, did you give it any water? Or before you killed the cow, did you give it anything to drink, or did it die thirsty? And they tell him, why are you asking? He'd say to them, because my father Hussein died thirsty. No one gave him any water to drink, and he begged the men for water. When he was on his deathbed, his son Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam comes onto his body, and he's bidding him farewell. And he says to him, he sees him crying, he says to him, Father, why do I see you cry in your last moments? He says to him, my son, O Baqir, you are now near my body when I die. But I ask you, who was near the body of Aba Abdullah when he died? You are now near me. But when my father Hussein was in his final moments, Shimr approaches my father Aba Abdullah, and he kicks al-Imam al-Hussein, and he comes and sits on top of his body. Lady Zainab alayhi salam leaves her tent at that moment, and she goes towards a hill known as At-Tall al-Zainabiyya, and she yells in a loud voice, Akhi Hussein, إن كنت حيا فأدركنا وإن كنت ميتا فأمرك وأمرنا إلى الله. She says to him, Brother Hussein, if you are alive, then come for us. But if you had died, then your situation and our situation is with Allah. And truly the situation of Zainab was made worse after that situation. When Umar ibn Sa'ad pulled the woman away from the body of Aba Abdullah, and he made them ride on the camels to reach Medina, to reach Al-Kufa, Lady Zainab looks at her sister Kulthum. She says to her sister, why don't I help you ride the camel? Kulthum says to her, no, let me help you ride, because if you help me, then who will then help you? She looks at the river of Al-Furat and she says, Kulthum, don't worry. I'm going to call on the one who brought me from Medina. I'm going to call on Abbas. And she looked towards the river and said, Brother Abbas, were you not the one who brought me from Medina? Why don't you come now and take me? Imam Zain al-Abidin narrates, he says, when we reached closer to the river, to the city of Medina, as we were going back from the days and days of walking, he says, I looked at one man next to me by the name of Bishr ibn Hadlam, who was a great poet. He says, I said to him, oh Bishr, your father was a great poet. Can you go into Medina and recite poetry about us? Bishr says, I entered Medina and I started reciting these lines. Ya ahli Yathrib la muqam lakum biha. قتل الحسين فأدمعي مدراره الجسم منه بكربلاء مخضب والرأس منه على القنا يدار. Bishr started to say that, O people of Medina, there's no place left for you in the city. The grandson of Muhammad has been killed. We left his body in Karbala and his head is now accompanying us. One lady hears him and she has a baby on her shoulder. She says to him, Bishr, what news do you have of Hussein? He says to her, O lady, who are you? She says, I am the mother of Abbas, Ummul Banim. He says to her, O lady, may Allah bless your soul, for your son Jaffar has been killed. She says to him, I asked you about Hussein. He says to her, may Allah bless your soul, your son Uthman has been killed. She says, I asked you about Hussein. He says to her, may Allah bless your soul, your son Abbas has been killed. He then narrates, she fell to the ground and she started to weep and cry. And she looked at me once again and she said, tell me about Hussein. He says, I looked at her and said to her, عظم الله لك الأجر بأبي عبد الله الحسين. For we have left his body, I have none left. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. يا Allah. Let's raise our hands towards dua. It's a blessed night and many have asked us for our dua. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to heal those who are sick and to give those who need strength. Millions of refugees in the world. There are many of your brothers and sisters who are in need in Iraq and many other countries around the world. Those who are in need everywhere. So we'll recite together Amma Nijubu 5 times. And we'll recite Ya Allah 11 times together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amman يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. أمن 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 يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. يا الله 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 يا الله. الله شافي جميع المرضى يا الله. اللهم اقض جميع حوائجنا يا الله. اللهم لا تسلط علينا من لا يرحمنا يا الله. ولأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات نقرأ جميعا سورة المباركة الفاتحة تسبقها صلوات.
Imam Hussein, Imam Hussein, Imam Hussein, Imam Hussein, Imam Hussein, Imam Hussein, Imam Hussein. السلام عبد الله السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله إمام حسين إمام حسين إمام حسين إمام حسين Imam Hussein, Imam Hussein. He is the son of Ali and Fatima. He is the grandson of Muhammad Rasulullah. He is the carrier of the purest heart. His blessed house tall, he's shining like a star. He has the highest status one can gain. Allah, look at the of Imam Hussein. Allah, look at the heart of Imam Hussein. Allah, look at the heart of him. Spent his life helping the needy. He fed the orphans whilst everyone would sleep. He gave everything generously. He wiped all the tears of anyone who would weep. He is the definition of human. Allah, look at the heart of Imam Hussein. Allah, at the heart of Imam Hussein. Allah, look at the heart of. He was the merciful and filled with love. The angels would arrive at his door from above. When it is a test so tough, we ask from our master, because in him we trust. All of our wish from his door we gain. Look at the heart of Imam Hussein. Allah, Allah, look at the Holy Prophet. He would save Islam whenever faced threat. His grandfather cried and said, this promise I'll fulfill if all my blood is shed. I'm ready to suffer any pain. Allah, look at Imam Hussein. Allah, look.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة. السلام عليك أيها الحسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. سيدي ومولاي بالفضل العباس واخته العقيل الحوراء زينب. السلام علينا العابدين. السلام عليك أيها الباقر. السلام عليك أيها الصادق. السلام عليك أيها الكاظم. السلام عليك أيها الرضا. السلام عليك أيها الجواد. السلام عليك أيها الهادي. السلام عليك أيها العسكري. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك الرحمن قرآن. السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وجعل مخرجك وظهورك، واجعلنا من أنصارك وأعوانك المستشهدين بين يديك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلوات.